Start. I'm hitting the record so we know that we have it. Who was my person who said that it was their favorite? I think it was Myra, who might not be here. Anybody else who has a love of Frank Lloyd Wright? Or are we still just in love with the Rococo so much that we don't want to move on to something so purely geometric and linear? Don't overwhelm me with your participation, guys. All right, fine, we'll move on. I get it. Okay, so fairly plain, the shaker style. Now I have added slides outside of this. Aesthetic movement. None of you are familiar with this yet. Have you ever taken an art history course? Oh, here we go. Madeline says she loves his designs but haven't been in any of the houses. And then aesthetic movement. Anyone familiar with this as it relates to art history? Have you taken an art history course? Are you currently taking one with another teacher here? Yes, yes. Okay, so I feel like there's two interpretations of the aesthetic movement. So for this week, I know you haven't read that, and I have to keep it in mind because it's one that's super fresh in my memory. Sometimes I read the chapters 2 weeks in advance and sometimes one to refresh myself. But for the aesthetic movement, was there anything specific you remember when you were taking an art class? Or so maybe your I haves and yeses were just art history, but you don't remember a lot of details about the aesthetic movement. Any famous artists or concepts? I'll let that play out in the background. So we had our initial slides. When you're looking at this, now I think this is better since you don't remember much and you don't know anything going in. So this is fun for me because I do know, in this case, a lot about it. I think this is fun before the book tells you or informs you how to feel. What do you feel looking at a space like this that's on the screen currently? Pixelation aside, just the overall design aesthetic, if you will. Does it feel exciting, busy, messy, ornate, simple, high contrast, chaotic? Not a fan. It looks busy and harsh. Okay. Anyone else? Omar, what do you feel about this space? There we go. Very detailed. Okay. What about, let's see, so I have Omar, Nicole, Liz. What about Caitlin? Catanzarite. What do you think of this space? It's too much. Don't know how to explain. I think there is a lot going on. And so we see some elements. What elements? Okay, let's see if we can't go back a step and get a different picture or forward. Okay, so let's look at this. There's similar elements. What kind of motifs can you see just from looking at it, whether it's in the wallpaper, the rugs, the furniture that's being used, ceilings? Anything we've experienced earlier? Any type of style? Japanese, for sure Japanese and other Asian influences. Do you see it mostly in the fabrics and wall materials, or do you see it in the architecture as well? Just an overall Japanese influence? The bamboo chair. And maybe even the detail around the fireplace a little bit and how we have the tiering going on. And then I don't know that we can say the sunflower wallpaper is Japanese, but the rug itself, oriental rugs being utilized. And then a lot of the fine detail work I think can lend itself to be either considered Japanese or maybe possibly lending itself to be Islamic. Yep, the architectural lines and ceiling lines I think do lend themselves to have attributes of Japanese and other Asian cultures. And we have a little bit of mixture. I mean, our art feels not at all Japanese. All right, I had someone join, so let me add them to my list so I don't forget at the end. So the major one is Japanese. I think if that's the one thing that you pick up on these slides, that's, we'll say, good enough for now. All right, let's move forward. So here's our exteriors. We can see a little bit of Islamic influence. We see some mixed materials. We have brick. We have some clay shingling, possibly, and here we have some more of those more Eastern influences. Lots of brick though. Let's keep going. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead. What I did was I wanted to look at the first slides, and then I've added plenty on. So we'll come back to aesthetic movement. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. I got excited adding my own slides. So let's go in the order of the book. Shakers. So simple faith-dominated lifestyles. They emphasize communal living. This is different though than when we say they're living in community. It's a much different community than, say, the modern pocket neighborhood, right? Their community is defined by their religious tenets, and those tenets guide every aspect of their lives, which is far different than just the pocket neighborhood where we're focused on sustainability and living in community where we share things such as our gardens and our everyday life. It's not very much the religious emphasis. They have interiors, buildings, and furniture that are very much focused on work and function. We have divisions by sex. Men, oh, this was an example. So men should be involved in farming and women should be involved in weaving. And we'll see how they have given them individual rooms within the home or within, let's say, an outbuilding of some type where they've divided them into two spaces where the women should focus on what they're supposed to do and the men focus on what they're supposed to do. They even had individual entrances. This was sometimes seen in the homes, but especially seen in their community buildings where they did most of their worship. So no decoration. They believe that things should be pure, plain, not only a purity in form, but a purity in mind overall. So they have these religious overtones going throughout, and then that is informing their furniture and their house, or architecture, I should say. Harmony is a big emphasis, and we'll see harmony, the common thread, the idea. We're starting to get more of the principles of design this week. So harmony and order were their most esteemed values and virtues. Harmony and order were translated into design of their daily life by workmanship and utility. So then we have flowers and hearts. So you're not going to see very many options for motifs this week. Sometimes we may see flowers and hearts, but for the most part they choose to do non-representational shapes such as quilted, geometric patterns that have no true translation to any existing thing. Function, form, and beauty, with an emphasis definitely on function. Simple, quality function. Abstracted, Georgian, and Greek revival are the greatest relations we can make, especially with the exteriors. We'll see a lot of Georgian interiors, more of the Greek revival, kind of thinking of the white walls more than anything else, and minimalism. They believed in meeting, dwelling, and community work. And they also had a separate location for a trustee office. So the trustee office, as it relates to the Shakers, was where if, say, me as a person who's not involved in their community, I wanted to come visit and see how they lived, or I was thinking about joining, the trustee office was a separate building. It was the only building that went against any of their beliefs. So it would be the building that possibly would have decorative wallpaper or maybe some carpet, as they felt it would help ease your transition into their community. So kind of strange. All of their homes and meeting centers, they would be extremely plain and be focused on function. But then they had this trustee office that was meant to ease the transition by introducing things that they considered worldly and more extravagant. So here's the Shakers village of Pleasant Hill. It was established by Micah Burnett in 1820. And here's two different views of it. I felt like this one was okay, but this one was better. It gave us more the idea of the expansiveness of the layout. This one's also shown in your book. So we're seeing a little bit of that Georgian influence. Here's an interior. So the emphasis on function and work. We can clearly see in the picture in the upper left-hand corner, this is a space for work. Now, these spaces aren't all the same, right? We have what could be considered a living space. It's hard to distinguish for this group of people because they're also focused on work. Each room has something to do with work. So we have two possible living spaces on the left where we have weaving going on the bottom. We might be organizing things, doing some woodworking on the top. In the right-hand pictures, the top right, we have a bedroom, which there's still a wheel next to the bed for working. There's, on the bottom, a classroom, extremely plain, only desks with chairs. And outside of that, we have a clock. What is a, this is kind of like a duh question, but what are some design aesthetic things that we see going on that are common in all of these pictures? So all different buildings, but they have a very clear style. Something about possibly the walls, the materials used, stylistic things that are the same in all pictures. Wood, plain wood. No color, pretty consistent in color, possibly, I want to say walnut. Green paneling. So I don't know if it's just not a great translation of the images, but let's say green, well, we could call it blue or green or black trim. So common to the Shakers, they liked to use especially Prussian blue, the specific blue they used, Prussian blue for the trim. Very linear. Doesn't look very comfortable in my opinion. We don't have a lot of cushion, so just straight wood or wicker. There are a lot of linear lines, but I think that the emphasis on those linear lines, so the same thing in all of them you see, and you can see my mouse upper left, these little clips here for possibly hanging laundry or coats or tools, and then in each of them we have this railing that runs the top of the room with little pegs. So this is especially indicative of the style that they have this kind of, I want to call it a toolbar after working in the commercial industry for so long. They have a running rail, a work rail at the top of the room near the top edge of the window, and it runs the whole expanse of the room where tools could be stored, or like I said, it could be laundry, but everything's utility. We have some built-in storage for organizational purposes, but outside of that there's no decorations, nothing ornate, everything is plain, simple, clean, and pure. And white walls. So white with Prussian blue, dark green, or black trim. Let's go ahead and flip forward. So Shakers, a modern interpretation. I just thought this was a nice image that shows how we can keep some of those design elements that are so clearly associated with the Shakers, but make them a little bit more modern. So we have the same idea of the dark trim, most specifically in a black or a Prussian blue. We then have the linear work storage area with some wicker, some wood chairs, the linear work storage area on the right bottom with some baskets that's connecting to, especially indicative of their style, the in-house fire burning stove. But I would definitely live in this space. I think it's a beautiful interpretation. The fairly rustic, unfinished board floor is also part of the Shaker style. Let me make sure. Architectural lines in the ceiling, wood, linear, green paneling. All right, so I got all of your comments. Here's some focus on the exteriors of Shaker buildings. So what do we see in common here? Some of them have more in common than others. Windows, yeah, similar types of windows, so sash windows, large sash windows. Symmetry, clean, very simple symmetry. What about the roof? The shape of the roof, bam, just like that. They answered me and read my mind. So the shape of the roof, do we have any idea what the shapes of these roofs are called from past sessions? No takers? So is it the bottom left one a gambrel or a gable roof? What do you think it is? Go ahead, no one else? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Nicole Catlett got it. Gambrel roof. And then it has some dormers throughout. So the dormers into the gambrel roof, that is very common in Shaker buildings, but not in all Shaker buildings. Most often it's utilized for their community centers. And then the other buildings, we can also see something else, not thinking of the pitch or shape of the roof, something about the roof though, near that area. What do they all seem to have in common for the most part? This is for 50 points, guys. All right. They all have the double chimneys, right? So we have the upper left-hand image, the bigger of the buildings has the double chimneys. Yep, yeah, Nicole got it just right after I said it. So I'll give her the 50 points towards. We'll have to figure it out. Then we have the other one, upper right, lower left. They all have those double chimneys. So sash windows, big sash windows to let light in, double chimneys, gambrel roof, roofs with lower pitch roof lines. Outside of that, we do have, oh, one of these has it. The lower left-hand image, sorry, I got all my stuff in the way of it. Can't see on my screen. The lower left-hand image and the lower right-hand image, they each have double doorways. So the women would know which way to enter, and I don't want to get this wrong. Right hand, left. I want to say it's men on the left, women on the right, but there's an order and it's known within their religion, and they always go through those doors and never the two shall meet necessarily. And even in communal living situations, there's separate staircases that live to different dormitory parts of the house until you're married. So interesting, the separation between the two and then the work separation. Let me skip forward. Fabrics and furnishings. So here in the upper left-hand corner, I'm just showing the idea of the fabrics. I mean, for having such a plain culture, it's very interesting that they have really bright, vibrant colors that are allowed when it comes to their materials for fabric specifically, not their building materials. So architecturally, it's plain. But their fabrics can have these really brilliant colors. Although if they have brilliant colors, the more brilliant the colors, the more simple the actual design is to be. They never want it to be gaudy or over the top. That's not the intention behind having the bright colors. We have in the upper right-hand corner a bean basket. So everything they had, they were usually thinking of a purpose for something. So we would see these laying near the floor in the kitchen, and it was meant to make their work more efficient. The Shakers adapted many common items to have specific purposes. The bean sieve was made by adding holes to the bottom of a basic basket. And then it was meant to have perfect symmetry, and the weave was meant to suggest a high standard of quality required in even the simplest articles. So underlying their faith is the idea of this high quality underlining craftsmanship as well. Everything should be with the utmost highest quality and made out of good materials, what they consider to be natural and good. So then, outside of that image in the upper right for the bean basket, we have our chair here, and then we have the rug. Let me pick which I want to talk about first. So the rug. This a little bit contradicts what I said earlier about non-representational and only seeing the heart. I think the flower is one that I would suggest this is close enough to be a flower, and maybe the idea of a star behind, but it could be just a pure geometric pattern with no meaning to it. There might be various Shaker communities that share the same belief and organization, but the differences between them were always reflected in the different types of design that they used in their fabrics. The rug that's being shown on the screen, oh, my little mouse disappeared, is from Pleasant Hill, Kentucky, and it shows an exuberant decorative pattern that's not really found in the designs of New England communities. The Shakers would use several techniques for rug making. They would use braiding, tufting, and shearing. In each case, the wool threads or pieces of woolen cloth were sewn to a cloth base. So they weren't held together just on their own by weaving each of these cords. They always would have a cloth backing on the other side. On the right side of the screen, we do have an example of dress of the time. So the male dress is on the right, and then the female dress is on the left. Shaker dress conformed somewhat to prevailing styles, but it emphasized simplicity. Their favorite colors to use usually reflected the woods, and oftentimes were warm brown to represent butternut bark. Sometimes subdued colors reflect their humble, self-effacing Shaker spirit in a way. So like the light pink tones, the subtle navy tones, they had a lot of meaning throughout all of the objects and even in their dress that would relate back again to their religion. Man's costume incorporates a blue vest, a brown coat, and trousers. And notice they have very modest lengths, right? So although the woman's costume has narrow sleeves, it also would have possibly it has a, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. It has a triangular kerchief that we can see on here, a narrow waist, and then a bell skirt that would go all the way to the foot. And this meant that it would be this dress for almost everyone that was part of the community, and it was meant to not give individualism within the costume. So everybody had the same thing to wear. They might have varying colors of kerchiefs, but it would stay within that subdued palette. And outside of the kerchief and the under vest, there wasn't much difference at all. Okay, aesthetic movement. So this stems from the Crystal Palace exhibition. We have aesthetic, aesthetes, that's right, aesthetes, sorry, versus Philistines. They de-emphasize the styles, so historical styles is what's meant there. There's less historicism. So less the idea of if I'm going to have Japanese culture in my house, I'm going to have Japanese everything. So I want my fireplace to have Japanese carvings to it. I want to have my materials have lotus flowers all over them. We're trying to get away from the idea of matching everything just on purpose to symbolize a certain specific type of history, and more so coming into our own taste as it's reflected of our ability to understand art and beauty. So art is important in all areas of life. This is a new concept. To think that art is important in not only to our home life where we might be hanging the art, to think of it not just as something we do in our free time or that we appreciate on the side, but we should be really loving all aspects of our life. So whether that be our jobs, what we eat, what we listen to, what we read. So all areas of life have an opportunity to have an element of art to them. That was the biggest part of the aesthetic movement. There's beauty and usefulness in all forms of expression. There's less architectural examples of the aesthetic movement and more interiors, as it wasn't defining, as said before, a clear new style. It was more a combination of a style to give off a new feeling. There's arts for art's sake. This was the battle cry, a slogan. that originated with the French poet Théophile Gautier. So here we have now, so earlier, think back in time, use your time machine minds, to think about when I showed you those aesthetic slides and those rooms and how it made you feel. Now look at this slide. So these are motifs that are used for the aesthetic movement. How do these motifs make you feel? So earlier somebody said that there were some Japanese motifs. We said possibly Islamic. Do we see any other types of influences or anything completely new? Might be a trick question. The answer may be no, but it could be yes. Greek. I agree with you. I definitely see some Greek. Peacock pattern. Oh, don't we all love the peacock pattern? It's making a comeback. Okay, so I think those are the two most unique. The image on the lower left hand where it has a plate, that white image with the dragonfly on it, the emphasis of that image, one, it does tie in a little bit of the Japanese culture, but the introduction of the insect as being extremely important is newer, so not a part of the Japanese culture necessarily. There's a variety of insects that we would see in some of the aesthetic movement interiors. How do these make you feel? Are they all still fairly busy? All right, you guys think on that. So earlier we saw the aesthetes versus the Philistines. There's idea of delicacy and refinement of anything that is old, and then Oscar Wilde is one of the main people that you'll see mentioned in your books. He also expressed an interest in everything young and youthful. So we had people who were associated as the aesthetes, and they were versing or opposed to what they considered the lowbrow middle class who had absolutely no taste. So the people who were still just putting up Japanese in one room and Roman in the other and latching on to every type of wallpaper they could get their hands onto. So those people was who we see them coming up against and saying, no, in reality, there's some type of guideline that we have to have in order to decide what's truly beautiful. So the Americans adopt English aesthetic and artistic precepts. Example, what is beauty? So we now see, as I said earlier, we're going to see a common thread when we're even looking at the Shakers before the aesthetic movement. This movement towards using design principles to define our spaces as opposed to focusing on historicism. So this is where I think it's interesting. I see that that is what I'm supposed to believe. And then when I look at his space, like on the earlier image, I don't necessarily feel at ease or as if there's a sense of balance. So this is where when you get into your own formal projects and you're trying to convince your audience of something, there needs to be a clear description saying, maybe your emphasis is on one design element such as high contrast, or we're trying to have harmony and balance given tying in different types of geometric shapes, or the emphasis is on color. Really, we should hope to have a great balance of everything, but if not, we should at least tell our audience what we're shooting for, almost a thesis of our design. So here's the motifs. Let's continue on. Here's an image we saw earlier, a cleaner image, so I did get a cleaner one of the one in the lower right-hand corner. What do we notice about the objects in that space? It's kind of unique, I think, in a house that we haven't seen before. You're not quick enough. I'll answer it for you. All right, so we see kind of this ladder shelving units that are running the length of each of the walls. And they're clearly displaying all of these vases, right? From left to right, all the way around the room. We have different types of dishes, and then some vases, vases, Indiana, or wherever you're from and however you want to pronounce it. And then we have multiple colors. We have this very unique ceiling detail and lighting. We have to the side, if I move my chat, the peacock again, although a little bit abstracted, some more of the Japanese forms. So the idea of displaying objects is something that becomes very important during the aesthetic movement. I want to see if in all of my notes, because I tried to pull out a couple unique quotations as it related to what it was really trying to get at, and I feel like some of them will contradict your book and some of them will be accurate with your book, but I think it's all an interpretation of what the movement was trying to accomplish. So let's read this one first. In its essence, aestheticism was a movement for reform, and the project to infiltrate beauty into everyday life was still very much alive when the labor of the government made a brave attempt to bring forth art to the people on a giant scale. The quest for beauty inherent in the young, Terence Conrad's bid to bring good design to the high street will be clear to those of us who remember Habitat in its early pure incarnation. Now more than ever, we have power and knowledge to make informed choices of the things we want to live with, or aesthetic as well as ethical grounds. So at the very simplest level, what that is getting at is that before we saw people latching onto these ideas of culture just because it was new to them. So they wanted to have more Roman columns in their house for absolutely no reason than it was being moved from Europe into our culture, and we wanted to have every piece we could. Now it's getting into the idea of this is your home. But at the same time, we have people pushing for the emphasis on design principles. Like, there truly is a way to decide what is art and what is not art. And we do that by focusing on the principles of balance, line, symmetry, proportion, all of those things, color. I don't know that they do a great job of it. I don't know that I completely agree. And I'm kind of interested that the book and most of the research I did, although I didn't do a ton deep enough, I don't think, doesn't give me a clear reason why there's such a focus on the Oriental. Now, just because it's aesthetically pleasing doesn't mean that it can't be busy, I think is the biggest premise that I have to agree to, but it's hard for me to accept. Busy doesn't make it unpleasing, according to this. There's more of an emphasis less on, and I don't think the book makes this clear, less on the idea that we have good taste, and so that would imply not being busy, and more on the idea that we're loving what we live with, right? And we want it to be a reflection of our everyday lives, and hopefully some of that will reflect that we do in fact have taste. So above everything else, I think even beyond the element of taste, which is what the higher brow writers of the time and some of the architects were getting at, is we are getting better at these design principles and craftsmanship and quality. But for the everyday person, and eventually what's funny is we have a focus on, hey, this is extremely individual, perfectly crafted, and custom. But then eventually what happens? The middle class wants access to that custom stuff, but they can't afford it. So what do? We mass produce custom to the best of our abilities. But the idea that we love the things we live with, I just had that discussion with a graduate of IB Tech who's now working in the field, and he's doing really well for himself. And when I was thinking about remodeling my home, he said, do you want the space to feel well, I was trying to pick between blue and gray, which you'd think would be the easiest thing ever. And I hope I haven't brought this up already. But I was doing it for probably 2 weeks and then I couldn't pick it. And so I called him and he said, the first thing I ask my clients when I go to their spaces, what do you want it to feel like? Which seems like a duh question on my part. And I should just ask myself that question. And I think my answer to that was, I want it to feel kind of like a contrived magazine photo, which isn't good enough. And he said, well, try to think of it more as if you walk into a space, do you want it to feel like a hug? Feeling like a hug is very different than saying, I want it to feel modern. So if you could find one word to describe it, what would it be? And how does that reflect back on you? So I won't leave you with what I ended up choosing the gray because I came up with what I wanted that to be. But always having an idea that your design is pointed in a direction, and every object, the furniture, the decorative objects, the fabrics, they're all reflecting that concept, but also the overall mood and feeling that you want to convey. I think that I found it hard to synthesize the idea in the book that there's an emphasis on principle, but yet it looks so messy or busy to me. And then I liked other people's idea that it's more an emphasis on loving the objects you're living with. And we haven't seen that before, necessarily. So let's see. The most marvelous example of the aesthetic movement is Whistler's Peacock Room, which is this room down here in the corner. Designed for wealthy and famously unpleasant shipping tycoon Frederick Leland, the large-scale frieze of stylized peacocks, gold on turquoise blue, wound around the room into the dining room of the palatial house in Prince's Gate, giving his guests something sensational to look at while they ate. These days you have to travel to the States to see a masterpiece that is this great, is what the common consensus is. Simpler but still busy, Nicole says. So simpler now seeing this picture, but still busy. And why the peacock? So these are the questions they don't answer the why, they answer the how. I even thought about having us write on it because I want to know that much more, but I don't know for sure. And I knew it as it related to art history, but it didn't help me in terms of how it related to interiors. So the Great Exhibition. So here's our Crystal Palace again. I can't get enough. I know I keep bringing it up, but I did supply some links, some additional links on YouTube where you can watch kind of a running overview. There wasn't only interior showcases here, right? It was a showcase of the greatest science and scientific minds, the greatest mathematical minds. We had social aspects, interior design. So overall, it was lending itself to aesthetic. So we were thinking about the aesthetic movement and the leaders in pushing progress forward and what was based on those principles and how those principles of design are really true of all of the arts and should permeate every piece of our life, whether that's writing or culture or whatever it be. So that's a good video that does that. And then here's a good exhibition article as well. And really, the Great Exhibition, I think rightfully so, is considered one more of the wonders of the world, although it's not on the list. And this, I think, somebody asked you if you could go back in any point of time, what would you do? The more I study about this would probably be it. I think it was a pretty brilliant opportunity, and just the plethora of things that they had going on there is pretty astounding. So I focused a lot on the interior design part of the aesthetic movement. Yeah, let me back up real quick. But really, first and foremost, it was more so related to actual art or like a painter's movement. So aestheticism combated the popular anecdotal, sentimental, morally sensational type of art, especially of the Victorians, as I mentioned earlier, with the multiple rooms. It has its own dedicated showplace called the Governor's Gallery in Bond Street, which opened in 1877. And the Grosvenor was a sensation experience itself with a palatial decor, a gilt and inlaid marble and greenery silk walls, which showed off maximum advantage of the work of the aesthetic individuals at the time. And some of this will lead you to images of that. All right, arts and crafts movement. So we're getting into the good stuff. So it began in England in the 1880s and 90s. John Ruskin is directly credited with the origin. It's believed that real quality in design, sorry, I'm trying to move my GoToMeeting, was possible only only of a craftsman. Imagination and creative powers were integrated in the product. The antithesis of inhuman, mass-produced factory goods. So here's some images of English arts and crafts. So what do we see in common, or are they fairly different from each other, really? Do you think these look more similar or more different than each other? The answer is more different. I mean, we have some common threads. So things that we'll see in the arts and crafts. There is an emphasis on freedom of expression, and it'll vary a lot by different architects, but we really see the emphasis also on sense of place using types of regional and local materials. They also pay close attention to texture, color, pattern, and harmony, especially harmony with nature and the idea of catching light as it relates to the exterior architecture. And they kind of focused mostly on an informal, what I'll call character, I guess, but combining that with the natural design materials. So keeping the materials local and natural, and then so avoiding metals. At this point, we're still avoiding metals, although we'll see somebody who kind of pushed the bounds of the arts and craft movements going into more metal than even was used in any of these. They did use them sometimes, but not a majority of the material were metals. And then he also pushed the bounds of using concrete for the first time as it related to arts and crafts. I bet you can guess who it is. We see similar things. So without keeping it completely to a specific historical time period, they would fall into the habit of using medieval details quite a bit, Gothic details. We can see that in some of the arches and exterior materials, the stucco with the wood boards running down, and some of the slate tile roofs. Some things are unavoidable. We only have so many materials. But for the most part, it was pretty different. All right, let me scroll on to the next slide. So here's some bungalows. So we have lower roof lines. We usually have some type of porch, whether it's wraparound or just running the first front portion of the home. As it relates to the English arts and crafts, I'll just keep this image up for now. We'll see in our book that the SPAB was created, the Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings. So we see more attention to wanting to harmonize old and new things together and protect existing older buildings, but then coming in with quality renovation using quality craftsmanship to correct them or perfect them and make them better but different. So architects become much more concerned with the things of the past and how they can change them in a way that makes them more contemporary and beautiful in quality. And then back before, I'll click on some of this. So here we have an interior. We can clearly see a lot of emphasis in the linear horizontal lines. Built-ins were especially indicative of this style, although they come in a variety of shapes and sizes because of the amount of freedom of expression amongst the arts and crafts architects. Furniture was meant to reveal structure and truth and delight in materials. Not on like a spiritual level necessarily, although I think you can't deny that there's some element of that. There's freedom in expression in furniture as well, and in that there's a lot more custom pieces being built than ever before. So especially given the time period, we have going from mostly custom but okay materials that everyone had access to the Industrial Revolution, where we have everything being mass-produced but in completely low quality. And then we have arts and crafts where it's high quality and custom and extremely high quality, a better quality than we may have even seen in the past, in history that we've studied so far. So it's simple and plain. Often it can vary from simple and plain to even rustic and refined. It's hard for me sometimes to think about rustic in terms of being refined, but I think that you can have both. It leads to eventually, like I said, this idea of having such custom beautiful things in high quality leads to the middle class deciding that they want to have the same things, and then they're produced in low quality but similar in design. and freedom. Oh, I was going to ask, so you've been working on your homework, and then we're getting into the idea of the aesthetic movement and the arts and crafts. Do you feel in working on your homework, because really I gave you the freedom to combine styles, but do you feel that we're at a point where anything that's created isn't new necessarily, it's just a combination of things that were existing? I had a student here who said, you know, they can work all they want to create a new style, but really it's going to have only the same elements that have already existed. I mean, have you seen anything so far? We haven't made it to the end of our book, but recently where it's come on the news and they said, oh, a new style is popping up and we're all trending towards it. Or do you think we've exhausted most of our opportunity for that? Too philosophical for today? We need to drink a little bit more coffee, huh? Liz says she agrees the ideas we have are inspired by other styles. So let's keep that idea then, Liz, and then when we get into Frank Lloyd Wright, let's talk about like prairie style versus what had existed previously and how different, or if it's really just a combination of elements in the end that had pre-existed. All right, so here's another arts and crafts interior. Here's a rendering of one. Upper right-hand corner, we have one of Frank Lloyd Wright's interiors. William Morris. Sorry, William Morris, but we're not going to focus on you right now. So I'm going to skip forward, and I'm going to skip shingle style today. I'm just going to emphasize arts and crafts. So let's keep going. And I'm going to skip forward to my best friend, Frank Lloyd Wright. All right, so what image is being shown right now? Yes, there's Frank Lloyd Wright on the left. And then on the right, we have, what is the name of that building? The answer is Falling Water. What does a building like this, some of you are in my lighting and building class, I think we touched on it some. What do you notice? Okay, so outside of it being fairly linear and tiered, what do you notice about it as it relates to the environment it's in? Do you feel it sticks out? Do you feel it blends in, mimics? Do you feel it's sharp contrast? It works with the nature. Do you really honestly believe that, Nicole? I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just wondering. You do? Okay. So does it give you that feeling? Because I believe his overall feeling was that he's continuing the waterfall. We have this cascading effect of the first tier being more back and then the second tier protruding forward and then it drops down. So Liz says she feels it's a sharp contrast, a modern structure found in a natural area. So his intention was for it to be a continuation of nature and to really, if not blend in, at least mimic it enough that it felt natural in its environment and almost an extension of it. And I feel like there would be more argument by professional sides towards that, but I could definitely see the amount of contrast. Now, his use of material, Liz, though, that's okay. So that was his intention. But I asked a question because, you know, is it all relative? I hate to say yes. Yes is not the answer, as I would tell my 8th grade students as we're trying. Someone said, why do I get a grade in art? And I said, because clearly I can tell you, well, I didn't say this to them, but at home I'm thinking, I have 17 oranges that are the exact color orange that they followed the instructions, and then I have Jimmy's orange that's green, and clearly he did not. So it's not all completely subjective. There are rights and wrongs. But with this structure, so when we get into the idea of that balance, that very tough balance between the modern but also having it blend in with our nature, I think there can be an argument for both ways, although I know that professionals have created enough argument towards it blending well with its surroundings, or at least becoming an extension using the principles of design, that we have the illusion of falling or cascading water that's falling in, brings the eye downward towards the waterfall. So there's elements that do allow it to be interpreted that way. Here's a close-up, my favorite pixelated close-up of falling waters. Now it's helped by the fact that he uses materials found in nature. So we have the stone being pulled all the way up from the natural stone where the waterfall comes off, all the way up to the top of the building and around, and incorporated into the facade. That helps. Here we have our interior. Here he even has some of the natural stone cut out and acting as a possible sitting area. So it's not always what he builds on, it's what he leaves in, right? He has this be a part of his interior materials, bringing nature inside. What about the Guggenheim Museum? What is this made out of? We have a guess? Major material. No one wants to guess. What does it look like? It's gray and smooth. We already talked about it a little bit today. I just said, you know, who probably did this, but didn't give you a clear idea that it was definitely Frank Lloyd Wright. So it's concrete. And he's one of the only people that's associated, well, not true. He is one of the fathers of the use of concrete as it relates to arts and crafts movement. And also with this building, we have an element of where it looks almost as though it's floating at one end, or we have like a larger overhang in parts of it. He was also, and actually with Falling Waters as well, he would use the idea of a cantilever in supporting his buildings, which was a much more modern approach and very difficult to gauge and do mathematically compared to having a simple rectangular structure with no overhang and strange balance to it. So the Guggenheim Museum is a great example of his use of concrete as well as the cantilever system. And then Falling Waters is somewhat of an example of his use of the cantilever system. What was his main style? So whenever we think Frank Lloyd Wright, we think of his blank style homes. Prairie. You're killing it today, Nicole. So yes, it's prairie style. And I'll skip ahead to that, and then with that, I'll give you some background. So here's examples of the prairie style. The lower left-hand one is found in South Bend. Oh, Nicole, you're cheating. You're reading ahead. What kind of great student are you? Stop that. All right, so here's our prairie style homes here. But did you know it before? The prairie style? Or really it's just a part of great reading? You should be banned from answering, Nicole, for today. Just kidding. I'm okay with your answering. That shows retention in reading. So we have our prairie style homes. It was bred out of the idea that he wanted to emphasize the flat plains of the Midwest. Woo, go Midwest, right? And then we have these long linear lines, linear emphasizing the flat plains of the Midwest. On top of that, let's get a little bit of quotes and background on Frank Lloyd Wright. So Frank Lloyd Wright was under the idea that the fine arts should stand at the center as inspiration grouped about architecture, of which landscape and decorative arts should be a division. He had Taliesin, which is, I know, I've got images of it here. So here's two actually. So down here is Taliesin east, and then above is Taliesin west. And the east was now utilized, and actually when he was still living, it was utilized to train upcoming architects under him in his style. So very much the classical idea that somebody would study underneath you, they would learn your style and technique, and then you would even use them to do many of your sorry, many of the jobs that you were assigned at the time. It's not that he even did them. It was almost that his students were working underneath him and he would show them what to do. So they would create the elevations. So it says the celebrated master of Prairie School has expanded his vocabulary, and apprentices under his direction created renderings, made models, did engineering, and produced construction drawings. They supervised construction on projects like the Johnson Wax headquarters, Fallingwater, and the first Usonian houses. They did the first perspectives of the Guggenheim Museum and Menonon Trace. The Taliesin Fellowship had, with astonishing speed, developed into an exciting architectural laboratory which attracted some of the nation's best work and hosted many of the world's greatest artists and minds. In the 1940s, the Museum of Modern Art exhibited some of the models made by the students. So we have this idea that Frank Lloyd Wright did it all by himself, but a lot of it can be contributed to the students that studied underneath him in that classical way towards all of his styles. Now let's see if we have anything forward or if I have to jump back. So here's the Johnson's Wax building. Here's where I was talking about he kind of broke from the mold where everybody was trying to avoid as much use of metal and concrete. He adopted them in and expanded what was meant by the arts and crafts movement. So on the exterior facade, we can see that he used concrete as well as with these curved columns at the center and the ceiling details. And then he used a bunch of bent metal for the chairs and the desks. Now, he didn't have a great eye towards ergonomics if I was thinking that I wouldn't enjoy very much sitting in that chair in the lower right-hand corner. They were stiff-backed, clear geometric, very much uncomfortable forms in this situation, stiff geometric forms, and some of the first use of concrete and metal. So let me talk a little bit more while I have you. Let me check my time. Yeah, I've got you for a little bit more. Make you stay. And let me make sure I still have the same attendance and that I didn't miss anybody before we get too close to the end. All right. So, oh no, let's go backwards. That'll be the fastest way. I'll have to go forwards. Didn't want me to go backwards. I can't believe of everyone in this class, no one has been to see any of these. I say that. I've only been to the one locally that we had the opportunity to go through as students. But the rest of them I hope to someday go to. So, Taliesin. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So here we are. Now, this one, the west version, was in Arizona, I believe, and then the east version was in Wisconsin. But in Arizona, he would leave when it got too cool. He'd go there and enjoy the swimming pool. And eventually it would be used to train architects as well. But really, we consider the west the main location for training. It says that although it was an advanced concept, the building of the Taliesin East was not without faults. It needs constant repair and maintenance because of the roof line. Frank Lloyd Wright devised a plan to deal with the expensive and time-consuming maintenance, and that was what initially caused him to create the school, was to have a workshop where the architects could come and study with him as a master. And not only did this show talent in the field, but they would have to pay in advance as if it was a tuition even before the school was created, and then he put those monies towards the constant repair of the building. So it was very interesting how he had it all work out for him and his own purposes. So I do have, let's see, in 1931, Frank Wright circulated a prospectus to an international group of distinguished scholars and friends announcing their plan to form the school in Wisconsin. To learn by doing was the main concept behind the school. Surrounded by bright and committed, energetic apprentices, Frank Lloyd Wright's career as an architect found new vigor, and soon students could learn as they worked on some of the most innovative buildings in America. In winter of 1935, he moved the entire fellowship to Arizona, where they constructed the model of Broadacre City and Frank Lloyd Wright's concept of integration of living and working in successfully planned communities. The first winter in Arizona inaugurated the tradition of moving the school between Wisconsin and Arizona that still continues. The other idea that Frank Lloyd Wright has attributed to him is his idea of the Usonian houses. And the most basic way, the term Usonian gives the idea of a warm, open design of a small house with an emphasis on convenience, economy, and comfort. So let me go back a couple slides, and I don't have any pictures of the Usonian houses. I didn't know if we'd have time to get to it. So what about looking at his furniture? So we talked about him having, he was not only an architect, he was also an artist and a designer. So he was a triple threat. And with his furniture, we see emphasis on geometric forms, the intersecting planes. So right here we see intersecting planes, although we could have better examples of it. Even down here, this is a small example where the edge cuts through the other plane of the shape. His metal desks that I showed you earlier were designed functionally and visually unified with their surroundings. They're also among the first metal items that did not mimic wood within the arts and craft movement. The chairs were made of painted steel with leather upholstered seats and rigidly geometric backs with square perforations. In addition to furniture, he also designed stained glass windows, ceramics, glass, and metalwork and textiles. So really did everything. His work became a distance from the arts and crafts origin as he began to explore the structural and decorative potential of industrial concrete blocks, which he used to design the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo and 4 houses in Los Angeles. So I don't think that we think oftentimes of just how far his reach was when we think that he did design towards the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo. But hopefully this gives you quite more information on the Shakers, the arts and crafts, and the idea of the aesthetic movement, which I think is really a pivotal point for us as far as it pertains to art, architecture, and design, to start thinking about the value, what we value, why do we value it, what things do we feel are worthy of being lived with, and why. While the book might emphasize the idea of utilizing the principles to choose those objects, I would also make an argument that the aesthetic movement has just as much to do with attachment and feeling, overall feeling that you get when you're in a space because of the objects you chose. So I think I'm going to go ahead and release you. I will post the link for you to turn in your assignments for the week. And you still do have another week, although I think because I thought I checked my calendar and maybe I just wasn't thinking. I meant the week of November 3rd. Someone asked me if it was due. I think they were trying to figure out if it was due on it will in fact be the 9th. Okay, so I don't know if it's because it said the 3rd, but I'll check that. Oh, no, because you don't have access to the link yet. So it's really going to be due the 9th. If you finished it now, then that's awesome. But you still have enough time that you can continue to work on it, or you don't have to turn it today if you did finish it. All right? So I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, what's left of it, and your weekend. Thank you for coming, everyone. Bye.